Um, all right, well, welcome to the Portland Utility Board. I'm Kaliska Day. I'm one of the co-chairs. I'll be facilitating the meeting this morning. So I'm just going to do a quick call to order. Under Portland City Code and state law, the Portland Utility Board is holding this meeting electronically. Board members and relevant city staff are attending remotely, electronically, or by phone, and the city has made it available for the public to listen to the audio broadcast of this meeting. The meeting is being recorded. The public will have an opportunity to provide comments during the public comment portion of the agenda and can also provide written testimony to the board by emailing to the address shown. I'm just going to read our PUB belief and value statements. PUB believes and acts upon anti-racist principles in our meeting spaces and interactions with PUB. While every person has the right to share their personal perspective, we stand against wrongful conduct, particularly any conduct that is targeted toward people that are made vulnerable by systemic inequities. This means stepping up as a community when there is wrongful conduct and fostering a space of learning and growth. We put our principles into actions, which means speak up and speak out. Each person is empowered to maintain the culture of the Portland Utility Board. And we focus on the impacted individual or population and condemn the conduct and not the person. So I think Amy, sorry, is this you?
Yeah, I'll quickly run through the meeting guidelines. When you're speaking during the meeting, please state your name before you speak, and if appropriate, the name of the person you're addressing or that you're addressing the group. The chat box is only viewable by the host, which includes the PUB staff, Eliza and myself, and today Karen Williams. Please limit any chats to technical and logistical issues, including signing up for public comment to ask for technical assistance or remind us that you've been waiting to speak. The raise hand function is primarily used by the board. Co-hosts may lower your hand to keep the conversation flowing. During public comment periods, the public can raise their hands as well, and you'll be called on when appropriate. If you're connecting by phone, please press *9 to raise your hand. Videos may be turned on for the board, presenters, and facilitators when speaking. If desired, it's not required. Members of the public and others should leave videos off. Please mute your microphone when you're not speaking. Members of the public will be muted except when giving public comment. If you're using your phone, please press *6 to mute or unmute yourself. Public comment will be taken during the comment period early in the meeting. You can sign up through the chat with PUB staff or raise your hand during the public comment period. It also is available just prior to any formal board vote after a motion has been made and seconded by board members. As mentioned, the meeting is being recorded. Pass it back to you, Kaliska.
Thank you, Amy. All right, just briefly, we're going to go over our agenda. As you know, we just had a call to order. So next one, we'll just have disclosure of communications, public comment, review of minutes. We have a quick discussion about PUB focus and process, some updates. For those of you that are new, we're going to talk about budget season and kind of what we do as a board to get ready for that, and hopefully be out of here by 12:30. So with that, I think, so we have quorum. Is there any disclosure of communications?
Hi, this is Alex Lopez, voting member. I do have a few disclosures to disclose. I was at a community meeting in Linton with Commissioner Maps last week. A couple of meetings regarding Willamette Cove and the Portland Harbor cleanup with Jessica Turlikowski from Bureau of Environmental Services. And I believe there was another meeting with the Portland Harbor grant recipient. The organization I work for is one of those. And that was with Jessica Turlikowski and I believe Annie Von Berg with Bureau of Environmental Services as well.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Alex.
Thanks.
Teresa.
Hi, I just have my usual communications with my fellow board members at DPAVE, which includes a BES staff, and that's it.
Thank you very much, Teresa. Tom.
I was trying to get more familiar with the issues around cryptosporidium, and I was looking at the website and I found some really good information there on the Water Bureau site, but I also sent in a request for more information. And Jamie, who I think is on our meeting today, she responded. So I sort of indirectly had a communication with Jamie, which I don't know that that's, could somebody answer, do I need to actually mention this, or is this just everyday stuff that I don't need to mention? If somebody could answer that, that's not right now, but at whatever point is appropriate, that'd be great. Anyway, that's.
Hi, Tom. I think technically, since it's not on the agenda, you and not a decision point, you might not need to mention it, but it's good to let the board know. And also good, I think, as the co-chairs have requested to send those requests for information through the pub staff so that we can help route that through the bureaus efficiently and make sure that everybody's all on the same page about what information is being asked for.
I understand that. I did part of my process is to learn how well the bureaus respond to the public. So if the bureaus know I'm a pub member, then they're not going to, that won't be a regular response. So that's kind of why I just go through. In some cases, this was just me reading and learning, and I didn't think that I needed to go, or that it would be necessary to go through having you or Amy send my questions, because it was online and they were asking me if I had any more questions. So I think it gets a little bit tricky, but so sometimes I think I am just going to use the process that's there for things that I'm not, it's not, because again, this is not an issue that we've been discussing. I was just trying to get more information to be better informed about this issue. And there's a lot of good information there, especially for people that might be sensitive to the issue of what could happen if they, for instance, if they've had a heart transplant or some other types of things that make them more sensitive to this particular bug or whatever it's called. Anyway, well, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for that extra clarification and actually sharing with the board. So thank you.
Thanks, Tom. Anybody else? Don't see any more hands. So with that, I'm going to move on to public comments. Amy, Eliza, did you guys didn't have anybody sign up prior?
Yeah, no one signed up, but Lori has requested to make public comment.
Okay, go ahead, Lori.
Hi there, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Oh, great. Hi there, good morning. I actually wanted to say something first. Last week, I knew tap water database, an old tap water database was just updated by Environmental Working Group, or EWG. And I highly recommend that all pub members go there. It's just put in EWG and you'll see the tap water database. And you can look at water quality issues based on data across the entire country. It's really simple. It's great, user-friendly. Just put in your zip code, put in Portland Water Bureau, and then plug in, just tap on what about lead, and you will see a pie chart. And then what you should do is go to any other zip code, maybe where you grew up, and take a look and compare and prepare to be wowed. We are still an outlier in the lead levels here. Anyway, back to what I wrote here really quickly here. Advocates have come to the Bureau with concerns since 2017, when the Portland Water Bureau literally was, quote, sounding off alarm, unquote, on low-level cryptosporidium, but not lead. And what's remarkable about this is that the Bureau was in the middle of back-to-back lead action level exceedances at that time. This is big, but the Water Bureau press releases downplayed those. While reporters elsewhere diligently informed when other cities were exceeding this limit, most of us here heard nothing. Yet between 2016 and 19, Portland was called out in national news pieces alongside Newark and Pittsburgh, whose levels, by the way, are now lower than ours. PWB got the attention from the attention of National Resources Defense Council. And then in 2020, as recently as 2020, Portland was named during congressional testimonies by experts who know this stuff about lead and water. Did you know this in 2016 or even just a few years ago? Did you learn this in December 2020 when the LHRP manager, Scott Bradway, gave a presentation, but did not mention these recent exceedances? There have been about around a dozen total, by the way. I understand if you don't know any of this, since we did not learn of Portland Water's 24-year lead and water issues until very recently. Our coalition had to learn from national experts when our own provider at first ignored us in 2017, then began providing responses instead of answers. So we still kept going back to national experts when we weren't getting full answers and critical pieces of information, by the way. So here's the takeaway. The more corrosive the water, the more it corrodes lead-containing infrastructure, whether it's Newark, Pittsburgh, Denver, Chicago, Flint, Portland, and now just last month, Hamtramck, I can't even say that word, but it's Hamtramck, Michigan. The corrosion science is the same. Hamtramck, their lead in the municipal system is actually the same as Portland was 4 years ago, 17 parts per billion. And this Michigan city, just like the others I mentioned, except for Portland, they provided, and they do provide, free filters to protect residents until their utility fixes the problem. Now, yesterday morning, the Water Bureau gave a presentation at council requesting $8.5 million for chemicals to adjust their treatment after 24 years of improper treatment and maintenance that has damaged pipes, increased lead in our tap water, and risked health. Commissioner Hardesty expressed confusion, and rightly so. Our commissioners should absolutely understand how lead gets into our drinking water, and they still don't. They should absolutely understand how so-called improved corrosion control won't fix lead, and why the $1.5 billion filtration treatment plant originally sold to the public for cryptosporidium, why it won't either. With the bipartisan infrastructure bill just passing last week, one of the first things the Water Bureau will need is an inventory map so that they can find the culprit pipes that are underground that they need to remove. Many utilities started over a year ago, knowing that this would soon be required. And it's why I asked about this in October 2020. Director Solmer said that she had none, no inventory that is, and that they have no plans to create one either. We still are wondering why not. Finally, we're concerned why PUB is not getting accurate and full information about lead in drinking water. That's why today I've come here, because we're suggesting that any PUB members who are interested in water quality issues form a water quality and specifically a current issues subcommittee. Whether it is this year's Legionnaires outbreak, PFAS in the ground, PFAS risk in our groundwater source, cryptosporidium, or lead dislodging into tap water during disturbances that are caused by main breaks or pipe repairs. I think the public wants to understand actual water quality issues here, not just hear and see, everywhere we go, we see, quote, "We deliver excellent water every minute of every day." We really do need to learn more than that. And so far, Portlanders, by and large, are in the dark. Thank you. And by the way, I just wanted to again mention the EWG. It's EWG Tap Water Database. It's a great place to start. Thank you.
Thank you, Lori. I think that took our time, so I don't think we don't have any others. Do we?
I
Public
didn't
comments?
see any, no other
Okay.
requests for comment have come in.
Okay. Thank you, Lori. Thank you for that information. Thank you for the suggestions. I think we as pub have some follow-up items, so I appreciate that. So just moving on, we have meeting minutes to approve. So this is the October 21st meeting minutes. So if there's anybody that didn't receive it, let us know, but it was included in the material that was sent out beforehand. Eliza, it looks like you have sort of tick marks on the counter for the videos. Is that what these numbers are, like the 450 or,
Yep.
is that what? Okay, perfect, cool. Great.
Yes, exactly. Sorry, I was having an inbound text at the same time that you're asking me a
No
question.
problem.
Those blue marks in the minutes, I tried to explain at the very beginning, but they're to help you navigate to the video if you want to hear that particular section. So exactly right.
Okay. So we're a little bit behind time, so I'm just gonna give just a quick couple minutes here to see if we have any hands raised, if anybody has any comments from the last meeting minutes. Okay, seeing none. I think they pass as written. So we're gonna let that go. Eliza, do you want to introduce this one or?
Sure. Hi, everybody. We've been super busy, and I just want to acknowledge that yesterday council had a meeting. The Portland Harbor Grant Committee went before council, and Karen Williams was our representative from Pub, sharing a few brief remarks from Pub, and they were very eloquent. And I just wanted to give a chance for people to appreciate her stepping up to do that, and if she wanted to share anything from that council work session back with people.
Hi, everyone. This is Karen Williams, co-chair and voting member. I just would like to say thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak your words, our words, at the city council meeting yesterday. So thank you for that. And I was there for an hour. I delivered our testimony in about a minute. And the rest of the time was really being, pretty blown away, honestly, by the testimony of the grant recipients, and Bureau staff as well. But the presentations that Bureau staff gave were very, I thought, very thoughtfully composed, for sure. But then followed by that was testimony and experiences shared from grant recipients, as well as the grant committee members, or some of the grant committee members, some of whom we also heard from at our September 16th meeting, at which we voted in support of their request to city council. So I thought it was extremely positive experience. The testimony and the information seemed to be, this is just my perception, but very well received by city council and thoughtfully received. Commissioner Hardesty had many, very hard questions. I think hard questions about accountability and demonstrating that the outcomes of the grant spending, I guess, if you want to call it that, really were demonstrable and moved communities forward, and not, that wasn't just, this is my words and my interpretation, but just that they weren't just one-off engagement opportunities, that it was really giving communities a real opportunity to influence in the long term, the Portland Harbor cleanup that, is going to be going on for decades, right? So I thought it was a really thought-provoking experience. And again, thanks to board members, my co-board members for supporting the work of the Portland Harbor Grants program.
Thanks, Karen. Thank you so much for stepping up to the plate and being a representative for Pub. I will definitely just kind of plug and encourage any of the other board members, if you ever have the opportunity to be in front of council, it's kind of a unique experience. So don't be shy. Just going to encourage, kind of empower you to, if you, feel like you want to try it out and, speak for Pub, it's great. So thank you, Karen, for doing that for us. I don't want to cut this short because I do think it's great, but we do kind of have to move on. So I think, Robin, you have a topic you'd like us to discuss. I think we're going to turn the time over to you.
Hello. Yeah, let me just grab up the materials I had. I had sent something to Eliza just in that review of like our normal, every couple of months we're asked how many hours we put in work into the Pub and like what we can do to make the Pub better. And so in that like little messaging I had written, which is also just in the email I think we recently got for this one, but I'll read it. I had just said that I often feel that the bureaus kind of lead the conversation and are setting the agendas in our Pub meetings more than Pub members ourselves. And that I would like to see more Pub meetings with maybe just Pub members every once in a while to allow us time to really regroup as a body without any like outside presenters spending half of our time reading a PowerPoint, even with what they come with good intention, of course. And I'd also like the presenters who come to provide their email on their slides, because that would give a connection to the members of the public who come to reach out to them, as well as open a line of communication, I think, for us and Pub members. And I had specifically written in my little review about, like, I think about Congresswoman Maxine Waters saying, "I'm reclaiming my time," and just thinking about how we do really have short meetings. We have 11 incredibly wonderful board members who have a depth of knowledge that we need to hear. We also have public comments and we have bureau presentations. And I think we need to be addressing either the lack of time that we have or modifying how we meet. Either if that's like kind of pushing for like the main follow-up, like reinforcing that the follow-up is the best main communication line might be good, or just addressing the fact that we always have more on our plate than we can actually discuss, and trying to see if we should expand our time a little bit or do what we can individually or as a group to just be more concise. And that way we can really use the 3 hours that we have each month to really work for each other. That was all.
Okay, so we did have Karen Williams and I have we're trying to set up some time with Pub staff. So Gabe Solmer, I think we're trying to get some time with her to figure out what is sort of the best format. We did kind of pivot all of this from in-person into virtual very quickly. So there was a different structure and format prior that we've tried to mirror in a way, and I think works well in some cases and maybe not in others. As far as time extension, I guess I'm going to talk personally just for myself. I work as a consultant, so every hour and minute that I spend that's not associated with a client is money that I don't make for my company. And we are a small minority owned firm. So as much as I can try to be efficient with the time that I have here is my goal. And being a co-chair has taken a lot of my time. So I am just a little sensitive to that on a personal level. And I think Karen and I have tried really hard to prioritize topics based on the feedback that we've gotten from the board and things that they want to hear. And I think trying to sort of rein in some of these has been a little bit difficult, just because there has been some pretty hot topics. So we also want to, acknowledge that we give space to people when we need to give space to people, and trying to prioritize that. So I guess if there's thoughts from other people on the board, I mean, we're obviously open to suggestions. This is a format that's not tried and true, in the sense that this wasn't how we historically ran our meetings. So I think if there's thoughts that we, shorten the presentations, or if we don't like the presentations, I don't know what's most effective. If I don't know if Robin, if you want to lead the charge, but taking suggestions from other people. Like I don't have any, we did also discuss previous to this, and maybe before some of you guys were on the board, that having some of the board members facilitate some of these meetings. So the burden of responsibility doesn't always lay on Karen and I's shoulders, and give other people an opportunity to prioritize things as well. So I'm going to give about 10 minutes here for discussion. So Julia?
Yeah, thank you. This is just kind of a question, I think, for, well, I don't know, whoever feels like they might be able to answer it. I think that we're touching on something that's one of the challenges of this group, which is even the process of having a discussion about deciding what the big topics are that we want to talk about, what should be on the agenda, is something that we can't do outside of a public setting. And I'm trying to figure out, like, is the best way for us to do this, or there to be maybe like a survey that asks each member what their top priority issues they would like to be covering that we're maybe not talking about enough. I'm just trying to figure out what's the best way for getting the information to the chairs and the folks who are setting the agenda for this meeting, so that it's directed by the pub in a way that's not, wasting these public meeting times. Or do we want to actually have an agenda setting meeting that's a public meeting? I don't know. That's one of the things that I feel like is a challenge. Is I agree about having a desire to be able to have those more open discussions where we're deliberating about what exactly it is we want to be doing in this space and how we want to be responding to the information we're receiving. But I think how we set that agenda is challenging, because it seems like that also has to be done in the public eye. So anyway, I'm just expressing my kind of confusion about like process on how we would accomplish this. I think very good idea.
So I don't know if you guys remember back, we made a work plan that we went through for a couple meetings, and that was sort of our tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. I don't know if it'd be helpful that we send that back out and just revisit it at one of our meetings again and see if their items have changed since then. I mean, it's a working document. So this was, input we had asked at the beginning from all of the pub staff. So if there's, since then it's been a few months, if we revisit that and kind of look back, or if there's items that you guys have sort of, in your head earmarked as, hey, I'd really like to visit this. I will say, as pub staff, or as the board, and Eliza, correct me if I'm speaking out of turn here, but a lot of times our responsibility is to either provide recommendations or commentary to items that are coming from the bureaus or advocates for public. So there isn't, we are a little bit limited on what we can, I guess, provide as feedback, or the format that we can provide back to the bureau. So I just want to be kind of cognizant of like our role and sort of our delineation there. So
I know, as a quick follow-up to that, I feel like we identified issue areas in that document for sure. I'm not sure we really talked about how we want to address those issue areas and build them into our agendas and have discussions about them. But I do agree that you're right. We have identified our priority issue areas, and that was, I think, helpful.
Karen Spencer.
Thank you. First, I want to thank both of our co-chairs for the work that they've done. I've chaired boards and committees before, and I know that sometimes it's a thankless task. And so just want to thank you for your efforts and work and commitment on that. I like the fact that we're having this conversation. I think the recent discussions that we've had on debt collection were a model that we might think about using more often, where we are provided the information and materials beforehand, and then we can ask questions of the Bureau staff as needed, and then have a conversation amongst ourselves. And maybe what we need to do is figure out when would that be appropriate or not. And particularly given the composition of the board, if we have new board members, I think it's a little bit more challenging to do that method than on a new topic. But if there is a topic that we've covered and they can go back to prior meetings or meeting minutes, maybe that would be helpful to do. So maybe thinking a little bit more about how we can have more data up front for more Q&A during the sessions.
Thanks, Karen. I mean, I think for me, it's hard for us to plan the agendas and how we have these presentations if we don't have suggestions. So I guess since the agenda goes out, I guess it would be helpful for, I guess, after this discussion to know, what would be a favored format if the presentations aren't enough, or if we want to have sort of less of those. Sometimes we get requests from the bureaus that sort of usurps a little bit. They would like feedback or a weigh in from us in sort of short timelines. So that does kind of play in, and we want to be responsive to them as well for all the time that they put into volunteer. So yeah, I'm open to suggestions. So Tom, did you have something?
Yeah, I wanted to follow up on this, and perhaps one of the issues that came up today might be an example. So for instance, I like the idea of getting information in advance. So if there's an issue, so let's say for instance, lead. So if the Bureau could give us sort of a packet of information, or a page even, as small as that, and how they are, their position on lead, what they're doing, how they're doing it, et cetera, et cetera. And then we've been getting feedback from the public that they have some thoughts that they feel are not, or issues they feel are not being addressed in an appropriate way. Anyway, so if we can get information in advance, rather than having a presentation, but then have staff from the bureaus be at our meeting. So let's say we do a meeting about lead, we get information in advance, read ahead type stuff, and then we have the meeting, and our discussion would be perhaps, okay, well, I don't know exactly what it would be, but we would discuss this issue of lead. And for instance, do we as the pub believe that the Water Bureau is doing everything it can? Do we see anything that we can suggest or recommend, or whatever the case may be? But at least we would be able to, I think, address it, and then be able to ask questions of staff who are there at the meeting, get some information, right away, and then hopefully get enough information to make a decision. Now, if we can't make a decision, then of course we might move it to another meeting in the future, the next meeting perhaps. But I think I especially like the idea of having an opportunity to read and digest something more in advance than a presentation. So if Water Bureau came and they gave us a presentation about lead, I have a hard time being able to have my mind work fast enough to know all of what I'm thinking or what I might want to know, and things like that. So anyway, just some thought. So whether it's lead or not, whatever the issue is, that we get that information and that we're able to get into it. And so, for instance, I like the idea also of finding out, well, what are the major issues that each hub member brings to the board? And for instance, I have been concerned about BES rates for many, many years. And I think there's a lot of inequity in those rates. And I'm looking forward to actually perhaps us having a meeting about rates where we can discuss what we think the rates, what of the rates today, even though there's a rate study, what do we think as a group of how the rates are structured right now? Do we see anything that we would want to point out? And if that turns out to be what the rate study finds, and we're both in agreement, then that's great. But if we're finding something that they're not necessarily looking at, then that would be another thing. So to me, read ahead type stuff, and then having an opportunity to focus on an issue at a meeting. And to me, lead, the rates are two big issues for me that seem to be keep coming up.
Thanks, Tom.
Thanks.
I will say, Karen, I do kind of have to balance a little bit because sometimes the bureaus don't have enough information that's useful. So we sort of have to make like an audible, like a call on whether or not we bring it to the next meeting. So I think Karen and I might strategize on how we check it back in with you guys. Karen Williams.
Thank you, Kaliska. Thanks everyone for this discussion, and really good ideas and things that we can think about how we improve our processes, because it's all about continual improvement for sure. I wanted to opine a bit on PowerPoint presentations, and the cliche joke that power corrupts and PowerPoint corrupts completely or something like that. I am with you that after a year and a half of nothing but Zoom PowerPoint presentations in all aspects of our lives, it is fatiguing, absolutely. Having said that, I do think something for us, that I would like us all to keep in mind is that the presentations, however they're delivered to us as a board during our meetings, are part of the public record. And as Robin pointed out, the public is viewing these presentations as well. So of course, I think there's a balance. I think the presentations are important to maintain in some form because they are part of the public record. And at the same time, I do think we continually need to be balancing, how much we're just sitting here receiving information and how much we're actually deliberating and making decisions about the information that we're getting, because that's our job. So that was one thought. And then the other thought, and a couple folks have already said this, I just wanted to amplify that, Karen Spencer and Tom, about the importance, and Julia as well, about getting information in advance so that this is still your all, right, volunteer time, but so that you can read and jot down questions and do your own research and that sort of thing. So absolutely, I think that's totally and I think that's a model that we've been following to some extent, but we could do more of it, and we could ask for more information ahead of time, ahead of the meeting. So solid on that. The one additional thought that I have kind of related to that is that the co-chairs, whoever they are, have and will continue to have meetings with like 4 or so meetings a year with bureau leadership. And the purpose of those meetings is kind of to sort of set the next quarter's agendas, in a sense, like, what is the right timing to be talking about these particular topics that pub members said that they wanted to hear about. So, before Kaliska and I go into our next meeting, and then again, whoever future co-chairs are, maybe it would be good to have a short discussion at the pub meeting before those bureau leadership meetings, like, hey, we have this meeting coming up in 2 weeks with bureau leadership. what do you want on the agenda? What do you want to make sure that we're discussing with them? What are the topics that you absolutely want to have on the agenda for discussion in the coming 3 months? And what information, do you need ahead of time? So I think co-chairs could be a little bit more deliberate about working with the board members in preparing for those leadership meetings. So those are my thoughts. Thank you.
Thanks, Karen. Gabby.
Hi everyone. Yeah, so I was actually thinking around about today's public testimony around what it could look like to have like a current issue subcommittee. I mean, obviously this would be adding on, which I know, Kaliska, you said that wouldn't be the most ideal. So if there was an issue that we were talking about that you wanted to be part of, that would be difficult. But I think it could be valuable for subcommittees in a kind of scheduled way, like maybe not every month, maybe every other month or something, to whatever frequency we want to talk about different issues that we want to bring. And I know it's more limiting because it's not a public meeting. There can only be a certain amount. But I'm just trying to think how that could look like. Maybe that's a little too complicated. But I do feel like getting together, even, the suggestion that Karen just mentioned, like a meeting where we could talk about before co-chairs go into this larger meeting with leadership, to kind of set those things up, like something where we can actually get together and decide some of those things like before they happen, I think is ideal.
Thanks, Gabby. And Kale.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Co-Chair, for time. So I was under the impression when we were coming up with priorities that those would be the agenda items going forward. And I think what we can also do with the prioritize, with the prioritized items is kind of speak amongst this group to kind of review some of the maybe changing priorities. I also think that it's a good idea to have, these subcommittees. I understand that there's, there are issues with people having time and having to sacrifice, take time off work. Some might be even unpaid. And so that brings up the issue, would we, would people be more inclined to participate in subcommittees if there was some sort of reimbursements, for their time, stipend for their time? That might be a conversation that we can have. But yeah, I feel like in some of these meetings is like the priorities that we had established were just, what we established, but the agenda items didn't reflect it. And for me, I also feel like the bills are being unpaid, and the issues with collections. Those are examples of emergent priorities that need to be discussed and hashed out, where we should be having meetings, whether it is separate or putting other agenda items aside, prioritized items aside, so that we can have a more thorough presentation as to who owes, what we can do, what are some options, what alternatives. I feel like there could be more potential for oversight if we were able to kind of move and adjust as where priorities go. Other than that, I think, I think that the co-chairs are, doing a great job in, and working with the Bureau to, identify certain areas that need to be prioritized. But I also feel like as a voting member, that we should also have some say in what should be a priority, not so much as just completely, giving that authority to the Bureau. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, it does. So to kind of wrap this up, I wonder if you guys just want to do a raise of hands. It would be helpful if Eliza sent back out our work plan that we had discussed earlier this year, to let you guys have a chance to relook at all the topics we have discussed and what we had prioritized back then. And give you guys a chance before like our next meeting or next couple, and maybe you guys pick 5 priorities from that so we can get a better understanding of what has shifted in the last few months. Does that sound like a plan moving forward?
This is Eliza, and I would add that you all have actually been making very good progress on your priorities in terms of the meeting time that we have. And so like your high level priorities, we actually have been moving forward relatively well, and that I can reflect that if I wish to share back out with you all. And I'd also say that the budget season, for folks who haven't been through it, is a much more structured process. And so if we prioritize now, I think it might be good to see the priorities and see what's changed and see what you actually have made progress on. That could be useful information for everybody to see. But I also want to be noting that the budget process, which we're going to speak to a little bit today, has its own structure and timeline that it follows.
Thanks, Eliza. Kale? You're on mute, Kale.
Thank you, Eliza, for that update. And I think that's a good example of kind of working on our priorities, because I see that in the past few meetings that that I've done, not the past consecutive meeting, in the past, that we would have these priorities, but we would have these other things added onto it. I would be more inclined to suggest that if the budget is a priority, that we don't include anything else, and we just knock it off, whether it takes 1 meeting, 2 meetings, or whatever. Knock it off before we go back to to other things. I know that timelines sometimes are not. Some timelines aren't as simplified as that, but I think if any way where we can just spend the bulk of our time and just get talk about specific issues before we move on, because sometimes it feels like we do a little bouncing towards in the meetings that we have, and I just feel like that kind of just the shift in conversations kind of requires me to reset a little bit and kind of change the way I see things and the way I think. And it kind of by the end of the meeting, I'm like, I have this question, but others may also have these questions, but it's not coming out. And sometimes these questions lead to dialogue that produces certain things. So I think the less bouncing back and forth, I think the better, at least for me, to stay focused.
Robin?
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of actually follow up with what Kale was saying, which was just maybe less agenda items. There are times when we can successfully get through 7, and then like today we're doing pretty well, but I came in about 15 minutes late, and not sure what the time was. Totally okay, but like our timing isn't always successful, and I think it's not that it feels like we're almost too ambitious, even though we are moving. It feels like we're moving successfully through things. It's just centering the meeting around pub members and the public. And yes, this is a space for the public to be educated by the Bureau, but it's mostly a space for pub to hold the Bureau accountable and to be educated so that we can thus educate the public, rather than the public coming to this just to hear the Portland Water Bureau tell them what they're going to tell their customers, and more what is the pub's understanding of the issues, and then educating the public from that. And so I think that would just successfully come kind of what Kale was saying, was just speak on certain issues, take the time that it takes, and maybe it means only doing 2 major topics per meeting, but it's also just the realization that we have 90 minutes together, and a lot of our agendas they're just very ambitious. And as someone who is too ambitious for my own good, that's a lesson I have to learn myself. And so I think it might be part of what we're doing, which is just we're in a transition period. As co-chairs, I absolutely recognize that you are as much volunteers as we are, and you're doing more. And it feels like I feel like I'm just shouting this at the co-chairs, and I'm not saying that at all. But it's just recentering. This is a space for pub members, the public, and the Water Bureau and BES to educate us. But it's mostly a space for us to interact with each other, to theorize, to understand what we're being told, how to interpret it, and then using that to connect with the public. And I think that the current setup of like a presentation first before a pub discussion, maybe it's as simple as that, which is coming to a pub meeting and getting to have the members of the pub speak before a bureau leadership comes in for a presentation. Maybe it's just like switching up what goes first, but I'll close it with that. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm gonna repeat myself again. Plan of action moving forward, what makes the most sense for the next meeting? Is it we send the work plan out? Do you guys want to send in?
This is Eliza, and I have information that I haven't been able to share with the co-chairs yet. It's been a couple busy weeks and a little lower on staffing. So for December 7th, we'll probably continue some budget prep work from today, and that actually is more of an internal discussion. Amy and I would be sharing information, but it would really be more of a discussion with you and the board about how you want to go about things. And the other thing that Water Bureau has put together is some basic materials about their joint project with the Tribal Relations Program, but they weren't planning on presenting. And they were planning to send that as read ahead. The Tribal Relations Program might like to come and talk with you all briefly, but if we did the read ahead, if they do want to come to the December 7th meeting, you could actually try the model of everybody in the board reading the read ahead, have some discussion, maybe Tribal Relations Program, if they have time and interest, they come after you've discussed and share a little bit about their program, and then we can do some more budget work. So you actually could trial that for your next meeting.
Thanks, Eliza, I appreciate it. But I guess what I'm feeling is that there's people who have priorities that they want to discuss, and those aren't being discussed. So I would like to know how I can get feedback from the pub members to prioritize this. So what makes sense for you guys? Alex?
Hi, Alex Lopez, voting member. Yeah, I just wanted to agree with the idea of actually sending out the previous priorities that we had established and just taking a look at that to essentially refresh those, given everything that's happened between then and now. So I think that's a good place to start with this.
Okay, and knowing that we want to, it sounds like pare down, are we going to take, say, the top 3 priorities from everybody and coalesce and see where we have crossover? Tom?
Why don't we send it out and let all of us take a look at it and then return our priorities and see how much consistency we have or not, and then kind of take it from there. But at least everybody would have a chance to review and then offer their position on their top 3 priorities, for instance, and then just see how that comes out. So we would allow time in our next meeting to be able to discuss those priorities and people's positions on those and how we move forward. And of course, the budget is something that's, I believe, in our responsibility. In other words, we don't get a choice to do the budget or not. The budget is what we are, partly what we're created to do, is to be an advisory group regarding the budgets. So that will take more and more time. And I'm in favor of having a meeting that's only about one subject if it's needed. So
Thanks, Tom.
Right.
Gail?
Yeah, I would be in favor of going over what our priorities was. And I don't think it's feasible or doable for us to, for the co-chairs to come up with, a whole set of priorities as far as meeting goes for every meeting. That's, I think that'd be complicated, and that wouldn't be, the best use of our time. I really think if we can agree, go back and take a look and agree on those top priorities, that would ease the process in a sense where now the co-chair has some guidelines as far as where are we going to, what are we going to be talking about, what is going on the agenda, because they can just reference back to the agenda and decide on the certain things that are, are in those categories. And so, I think, for example, so like if let's say equity was, our top priority, and there are some hiring practices or some complaints or anything like that that has to do with that, then that should be prioritized. That should be included in the next meeting. Kind of using that as an example, and it could be a number of things. If environmental was some, and there's a proposal to spend a certain amount of money, or people are proposing that would fall under one of their priorities, and that could be on the agenda. So, I think for the most part we've been doing that. I think that we've just been kind of the priorities are so numerous that it feels like we're just kind of doing a lot of I hate to use the words random stuff because they're not random, but we're just kind of, there's so many topics that are prioritized that it's hard to kind of stay focused on where the emergent priority are without including a whole bunch of topics into each meeting. So maybe we could narrow down the priorities a little bit more to provide further guidance.
Okay, thanks, Gail. So Eliza thinks we'll send back out the work plan to everybody after this meeting. We'll let people kind of look through it, bring back their list, and it sounds like on the next one, we'll discuss how we want to prioritize. I know that the budget one is something that will remain on our topic just because it does have a very structured timeline. There are deadlines that we do have to make as a board. So just so fully transparent here that will be one that has to stay on in that sense, and then we'll sort of infill with the rest. Is what it sounds like our plan of action is from here.
That sounds good. I think I will plan I'm going to ask to go to the next slide first. I'm reversing the order because I feel like the next slide is actually more relevant to the discussion at hand. So, there is in process many emails coming out to you, but and so one of them will be, I will take the work plan and your priorities, and I actually will. The table in the work plan actually indicates the bold are required elements. And so I'll re-highlight that. And I'll also show you the ones that you've already kind of done and the ones that are in progress. Kind of give you that idea. And I probably will get that out to you next week. What I also want to let you know is give you a brief update on your recommendations on debt recovery, billing, and financial assistance, which you've put a lot of work on, not just this fall, but also over the summer and spring. And I have a draft that I will also get out to you next week. And it has the recommendations that I have heard you all bring up in the prior discussions. It should say, especially from the most recent meetings and the spring, in other words, not going that much farther back than last spring. So, but including what just came up in the past 2 meetings. And I'm going to be passing it to you. So this is an attempt to do a best use of your board time. So I'm going to pass the initial list to your individual review with some instructions about how to review them and send me back your feedback. And I will be able to collate that, and that will help us, I think, structure the conversation in the meeting. Largely what I'll be asking you to do is at this stage, because they're a little drafty, is pay a little less attention to the wording, but more attention to, is this a recommendation you support? You know, once polished wording happens, is it a recommendation you don't support? Is it a recommendation where you would defer to others and you don't feel strongly one way or the other? Is it a recommendation you need to discuss in order to make that decision? And I think that will help us structure our conversation. And so expect that to come from me. There'll be a few places where I'll have some questions for you and some follow-up thoughts. And I think that's, I think the other thing I want to share about this is that's both sort of a methodology we used to use more prior to Zoom, but it will, I think, actually help structure the meeting conversations a little bit. So we'll see how that goes and adjust it. And the second piece about it is this was one of your priority areas, like a very high priority area for this board. And in fact, this work and coming up with these recommendations, as Karen Williams shared at the last meeting, is in some sense some of your budget work as well. So it's kind of doing both those things, because some of these recommendations may make sense to fill in with the budget. And I think I have nothing else to say about that. If anybody has questions about how it's going to work, the individual review, I would ask, once I send it out to you, read the instructions, and then you're like, oh, this doesn't make sense to me, then let's talk about it. But if any other feedback, I would be happy to take now. And otherwise, I would just say it's a great list. So, and I look forward to collating your individual thoughts on it to prepare for the next board discussion. And then I'm going to go back one slide now. Thank you, Amy. So we had a chance to meet, Pub staff had a chance to meet with Commissioner Maps, our liaisons in Commissioner Maps' office, and the staff were supportive of the idea of both a Pub Council work session and a Pub working meeting with Commissioner Maps. And they agreed that it made sense for the working meeting, if we decide to have one, to happen first and to be focused on shared budget priorities. So again, that's something to think about when you're looking at what's important for this board to do in the next couple months. And then they said that they agreed with the general feeling that the time of the Pub Council work session does seem complicated because of how budget season is shaping up. The fall bump was extended this year, and the mayor's guidance, which usually does sort of give some direction to budget development, will be coming out in early December probably, and that's a little bit later than usual. And so it may be tricky to get they agreed that giving us an extended window makes a lot of sense. And they said they would be keeping their eyes open if there was a time that made sense, like for council and you all to meet earlier in the spring. Otherwise, they thought, just thinking off the top of their head, that the September, early October timeframe before elections, but when the new board members are not totally brand new, might be a perfect time frame, right? And they also mentioned if at some point, and this could be tied again into your budget work, that you could always do a memo, sort of a memo update. This is what we've been working on, sort of very one page. These have been our priorities. This is the work we've been making. You could submit it to all council members. And if the board chose to and had the bandwidth, you could sign up for public testimony the week that you submitted that memo and just briefly speak to the memo, as all members of the public can speak to anything at the beginning of regular council meetings. And so that's a long-winded way of saying what I shared in the read ahead, but essentially they were excited and supportive of the directions the board was going with this work.
Thanks, Eliza. So are we just kind of, I don't want to say at the mercy, but just are going to have to kind of see when we can schedule this with Commissioner Maps based on?
I think part of what we might want to do is, I think it wouldn't happen in December, obviously, but in fact, your main budget work, happens in really the February, March timeframe. So we have a little time. I think a lot will be kind of letting you all because you've just indicated that you feel like you have multiple priorities and you want to winnow that down and figure out where to be most effective. And so I may actually add into the list that I send out to you all, assuming I can remember to do that, ask you to rank whether you want to try to schedule that work, how high a priority it is to meet with Commissioner Maps in that budget development period. And so what I think we would do is wait to communicate with his office further until we get your priorities back. Does that make sense? Because if you all determine that's a lower priority, that's good for his office to know.
Robin?
Yeah, I was, if I read correctly, the like read ahead material said that we could do it as early as spring. Can I ask why the Bureau, why we're pushing for like this September, October? I do realize like it says elections and new pub members, but I also don't necessarily think that we need to postpone this specifically to include people that will hire like a year from now. Not saying that they won't be part of the discussion, but it seems like we would possibly have the capacity to do this before a year from now. And so is there really a preference to September over like mid to end of spring?
No, what it was is that, and I'm sorry, what was sent in the email is clearer than what I'm saying now. They had indicated what we have all been feeling, that it's been a really tricky budget season ever since the pandemic has happened, and the fall bump has really run into the main budget season and really constrained the availability of council. And so that may be pushing out their work further too. And the one thing that the board doesn't want to do is come to council when council is so busy that your meeting with them won't be effective. And so what the commissioner map staff had said, they want to keep their eyes on the horizon and see if you could get in the spring. If we didn't have a window in the spring where it felt like council had that breathing room to have a productive working meeting with you all, they were thinking July might not be great because there'll be brand new people. And so that's why it was sort of spring or the fall, right? And so that was literally their thinking. Does that make more sense?
And this is Amy. You will be meeting with council in spring as part of your budget work session. So it's a shorter, it's testimony for the, as part of the budget work session for the bureaus, and then also for the rate hearing. But you do have those other touch points with council, but that also means that they have a lot of work sessions during that period. So throughout March, they have a lot of work sessions, and so their schedules are incredibly cramped. It's hard to schedule other work sessions during the time period that they have a lot of those budget work sessions. So the schedules just get really complicated during that March, April timeframe.
Thanks, Amy and Eliza. Any other questions? Tom?
Well, this isn't a question, more of a thought of, well, I'm a little confused, and what's hitting me is that we just talked about getting our list of priorities and looking at those again and things like that, and then having these various opportunities to meet with the commissioner, to meet with council, to meet with ourselves. And I'm just wondering, oh, and then we have the subcommittee that's looking at having a public meeting of some sort. And I'm thinking, what I feel that we haven't put together a solid package of what we're thinking about certain things. I mean, I think we've done a lot of work on and given a lot of information back to the Bureau, for instance, about the debt recovery and things like that. We're not done with that, but I mean, we've worked on that a lot, and that continues. But I'm just thinking, us sort of to have some planning type or have it as an item on our agenda that we can talk about. Well, what do we think we're going to, what's the most important for us thing for us to take to a meeting with the commissioner or take to a meeting with the council. That's different than, for instance, the meeting we might have or do have with council regarding the budget. So I'm not feeling clear. I guess that's, to make a long story short, I'm not feeling clear on what it is we would, that we all agree is the most important thing for us to take to one of these meetings. And I think that's the task at hand, is getting together as a group and figuring out what are these important issues that we want to take to a meeting with the commissioner or the council.
So Tom, I think that's what I think Eliza perhaps was suggesting, that we wait until we have this next discussion amongst pub board about what our priorities are and what we want to talk about before we go to Commissioner Maps. I think the value meeting with Commissioner Maps is if we know sort of what our hot topics are, what are the things that we want to discuss. This is an opportunity for us to align with the commissioner's office and understand from their side what is theirs as well. Is it aligned with theirs? Are there things that they're pushing forward and advocating for along with us? So it seems if there's opportunities to create that alignment, which I think the suggestion from Eliza was that we have that meeting amongst ourselves first, now that we know that we want to kind of winnow them down before we schedule this.
Okay, great.
And I would think for council, we would kind of go in hopefully with the commissioner in conjunction with, to sort of advocate in the same way, just to make it more aligned and yeah. So I think that's what the thought moving forward was. Does that kind of work with what you're looking to get out of it?
Yes, that's great.
Okay. Anything else?
I think that's good, and I'm gonna suggest, because we're at 12:15, that we not try to do the budget preview at this meeting, maybe. Maybe there's just, maybe it's useful. Amy, do you think it would be useful, like we could just step through the timeline? Maybe that's the most helpful, since people are wanting to look at priorities. I'm wondering if just stepping through the timeline might be most helpful.
Yeah, I'd still like to kind of just introduce the topic a little bit,
Okay.
for those who are unfamiliar with it. I mean, those that have gone through before kind of know that it's pretty regimented and we have some very tight timelines to get feedback. So I think your suggestion would be helpful.
Sure. I can start at the beginning and just try to move pretty quickly. I think, let me see where I have the timeline and the set of slides. I might be able to, let's just see if I.
So as Amy is bringing this up, I do want to caveat, I know it'll sound like a lot, but do remember that Eliza and Amy are extremely helpful resources through this whole thing, and they do help us a lot through the budget season. So
Yes, and well, so I will speak quickly, although most of the information, so especially this initial bit, you all have had the Budget 101 at least at some point, and if you don't remember it or you haven't watched it, I do have a link to the video that I can resend to you, and so you can walk through that again if you want a refresher, or you can just call me in and we can talk through questions. So just at a very high level, just a reminder that council's responsibilities at a very high level is that they each are assigned bureaus. So reminder that Commissioner Maps, of course, is assigned BES and Water Bureau. Council as a whole sets the city's citywide priorities, and a lot of their focus through the budget process is on general fund dollars. So remember that BES and Waters, the bulk, almost all of their dollars are from rates. So that's where a lot of your focus is on their allocation of rate dollars, while council's focus is on general fund. They also, of course, oversee the allocation of rates and through the rate hearing. But there's just a little bit of a disconnect because a lot of the conversation that takes place during the budget process is related to general funds. So just be aware of that as we're going through the budget process. Council considers input from advisory committees and ultimately approves and adopts the balanced budget. The budget responsibilities and opportunities for the pub is that you serve as the budget advisory committee for the bureaus, which means that you're responsible to submit a letter with the bureau's requested budgets. You also, though, will have added responsibilities throughout the budget process because you will provide testimony and participate in the budget work session with council. You'll have added opportunity to provide a more detailed recommendation letter to council later in the budget process. You'll have typically an opportunity to meet with the mayor directly and provide testimony and participate in the rate hearing before council. You'll see a lot of documents throughout the process. The most substantial documents are the requested budget documents that come from both bureaus. They're several hundred pages from each bureau. So there's a lot of materials to sort through if you want to read documents. And so throughout the process, we do try to kind of focus on what is the most important information to look at. But there's a lot to sort through. The bulk of the documents are organized into the program offer documents. And so each of the bureaus have their materials organized into program offers, which provide combines their information into program descriptions that has their budget information, equity information, and performance data for a set of services that are combined into single documents that provide kind of a set of services that are for a combined program area that makes sense. There's also a budget equity tool that is for the Bureau as a whole. They have a large capital improvement plan for all of their capital programs and 5-year financial plan. For the pub, the recent approach for several years has been to prioritize all of the program offer areas and choose kind of the top 3 to 5 program areas for each bureau to focus on for those bureaus, to have that be the areas that in meeting time is where they focus time for presentations from the bureaus, for conversations during the meetings. And it usually aligns with work plan areas and what you've prioritized for areas of focus for the work during the year. So we'll have more conversation for you all in coming meetings as to whether that is an approach you want to continue this year, but it is one that has been effective in recent years. There's other information that will be available for review. What has been really useful in recent years has been conversations that happen during meetings, a lot of Q&A that takes place during the meetings, so information that you'll get from Bureau staff in the meetings, as well as often written responses to questions that are asked that bureaus provide following meetings. Often program presentations and policy discussions that are happening both prior to budget time. There's a lot of overlap in the policy issues that you already have been talking about and a lot of the budget decisions that are being made. And so a lot of that information becomes relevant in your budget recommendations. You'll also have analyses that are done by the city budget office or other analyses that you may request from myself or from the city budget office. And so there might be other documents that might be helpful. And then also there will be guidance that come from council and or the commissioner's office, or feedback that we get from council offices that may be available for review. So just quickly, just to give you a sense of what prior year's budget guidance has looked like. Last year, the mayor's guidance was to focus on continuity of services and preparing for recovery, which meant that general fund bureaus were looking at 5% reductions and limited ad packages. There were some pretty specific guidance provided to the utility fund bureaus. At the very bottom here were the specific directions to the two utility bureaus, which were basically to develop budgets that were consistent with their prior rate forecast increases, for BES maintaining the 3.15% increase, and for Water Bureau 7.8%, which was what was in their forecasts. I would expect similar guidance this year, although inflation is higher than anticipated. And so we do not have the mayor's budget guidance yet, or guidance from the commissioner's office. That's been delayed with the delay in the bump, but I do expect that we should receive something soon. So we will let you know once we receive budget guidance. This you have seen before. This was from the rate hearing last year. Just a reminder that the projected increases from prior years or for future years were still projected to continue to increase around 4.9% to 5% combined increase between the two bureaus. So as Eliza was mentioning, just to give a sense of the timeline. So again, you've seen this before in the 101. So where we are right now is in the where the bureaus are focusing on the requested budget development. So the takes place over a number of months. We're still waiting on the budget guidance coming from the mayor's office and council. Once the requested budgets are due at the end of January, and then the city budget office conducts their analyses, and then the mayor's office works on their proposed budget. Then public hearings take place in April, May. Council works on developing their adopted budget, and then the adopted budget goes into place by July 1st. The orange kind of marks off some of the key touch points that you as pub members have some touch points with council. So when the requested budget is due is when we have the first letter that is submitted with the requested budget. The budget work session that takes place at some point in March is when the pub has opportunity to go before council and provide some talking points. It's usually, just about 5 minutes of speaking before council, sharing some specific recommendations and feedback on the Bureau's budget requests and recommendations. Typically, the mayor invites a couple pub members to speak with them directly to provide some feedback on the utility bureau's requested budgets. Usually that meeting is 15 to 30 minutes, kind of an open conversation and dialogue with a couple pub members. And then in May is when the rate hearing takes place. And again, that's about a 5-minute kind of public testimony opportunity. These final two pieces are when the bumps happen. As you can see, typically the fall bump usually happens sometime in October. As Eliza mentioned, that's been delayed. We're in mid-November and it's still happening. So as we move into kind of this next, preparing for this first phase, while the bureaus are developing their requested budget, we'll be preparing to hear from them what's happening within the bureaus as they're starting to do their internal development, while you as a pub are starting to kind of, you've already been working on your work plan, kind of the themes and some of your priorities as you're working with the bureaus on some of the policy issues that you're providing feedback on. And there are a number of values that have guided the pub's prior work for providing feedback on policy and budget issues. And so those are what are highlighted here. They're just provided in reverse alphabetic order. And so these have typically been highlighted in your budget letters. They're one of kind of the foundational pieces of your initial requested budget letter. And so that's one component that often is part of that initial requested budget. And then another key piece is typically kind of the touches on the work plan frames and major themes and priority areas that you have already started or you developed as part of your annual work plan and report. And that you continue to develop as you move through the year and work on the internal policy development and recommendations as you do your work. So this slide just kind of highlights those general categories that were captured in the report that you did to council just in September. And there's a lot of narrative behind each of those pieces that you all helped craft. And so there's a lot of detail behind that. And the reason I highlight that is that you all have done a lot of the hard work behind, I think, what eventually will be kind of some critical components of that first version of that initial letter that goes to council. Although there's still obviously more work that will need to be done as the pub continues to kind of work out the details and identify additional priorities that you'll want to develop in recommendations, early recommendations that will go to council. I know I'm running out of time. We'll have more time in our upcoming meetings to kind of talk about next steps. So just very quickly, I'll touch on this slide, kind of what I see as the next steps related to budget. I'm hoping to have some more conversation just about the process, particularly over the coming months. We end up spending a lot of time in December, January, February, and March in particular, talking about budget. If there is interest in maintaining that approach, certainly want to hear feedback from those of you who have been involved in prior years on how the program prioritization process worked or didn't work for you, and whether there's interest in continuing that approach. If there's interest in continuing that, then we can kind of do that offline and identify what areas we want to prioritize this year. We will work on hearing from the bureaus some kind of budget overviews and emerging issues, probably at the first January meeting, and then work over the December and January meetings to hear from you as a pub to affirm your values and themes for the initial budget letter, and then identify what emerging issues and priorities and initial recommendations you want to develop and integrate into that initial recommendation letter, which is your first deliverable. So with that, I think I have officially run a couple minutes over, so I apologize, but thank you for giving me the couple extra minutes. And if you have a minute more, I'd love to hear from folks. Otherwise, we will continue the conversation at the December 7th meeting.
Thank you so much, Amy. Unless you guys have questions, I think we'll have a lot more discussion about this later, but just wanted to give a quick introduction. it does sound daunting, but we also typically provide the letters from previous years, so you guys get an idea of kind of what those letters look like, and how they're structured, which makes it's always been very helpful for me as we've gone through this. So, unless there's anything else, I think that's where we end for now. Tom.
Just very quickly, I wanted to say that last year Amy sent me a hard copy of the budgets, and it was really helpful for me anyway to have that document. So I would like to request that when they come out that I would get another hard copy. And I'm mentioning this now, if there's anybody else that prefers hard copy over the internet copy. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for mentioning that, Tom.
Okay, so as far as potential topics, I think we kind of scrap this for now. We'll have the work plan sent out, and then I think next December 7th, we'll talk about priorities, and we'll winnow down and get a more thought out and vetted list for the remaining meetings that we have. So unless there's anything else, I think that's it. We'll let you guys get on with your day.
Thank you very much.